Agatha Raisin and the Wedding That Never Happened. Dear listeners, welcome to tonight's mystery. I'm Jane, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you here for another captivating tale. Before we dive in, I'd love to get to know you a little better. What's one hobby or passion that brings you joy? Are you into baking, painting, gardening, or perhaps something completely unexpected? Drop your answer in the comments. I always enjoy learning more about our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe, it will motivate me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and begin tonight's story. Chapter 1. The Invitation That Shouldn't Have Arrived. Agatha Raisin leaned back in her worn wicker chair, the early morning sun spilling gently over the tidy rows of her small Carsley garden. Steam curled lazily from her porcelain cup of coffee, carrying the rich aroma of dark roast mingled with a hint of the cinnamon sugar she had sprinkled just moments before. The garden was quiet, save for the occasional chirp of a robin or the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Agatha savored these moments, the brief calm before the day demanded her attention. She felt the usual thrill of satisfaction at a well-tended garden, neat flowerbeds, freshly swept paths, and the tiny pride of noticing a rosebud opening precisely on schedule. It was the sort of peace she cherished, though she knew it was fleeting in her often chaotic life. Her reverie was broken by the soft thud of mail dropping through the letterbox. With a mild sigh, she set down her coffee and walked to the door, expecting the usual mixture of bills, catalogs, and perhaps a card from a distant acquaintance. What she did not expect was an envelope unlike any she had received before. It was thick, cream-colored, and heavy with an air of ceremony. The handwriting was precise and looping, elegant in a way that made Agatha raise one finely arched eyebrow. She turned it over, revealing a wax seal stamped with a family crest she did not recognize. A shield split diagonally, one half a deep cobalt blue, the other gold, with a peculiar emblem that looked like a pair of crossed keys encircled by a garland of leaves. The seal seemed almost to hum with importance, or perhaps it was just her imagination adding a touch of drama. "Wedding?" she muttered to herself, curiosity prickling at the edges of her mind. She carefully broke the seal and slid the heavy card from its envelope. The text inside was formal, almost stiff, yet undeniably refined. An invitation to attend a wedding with all the customary pomp, time, date, and place, none of which meant anything to Agatha. She blinked, then read it again, convinced she must have misread something. No mention of who the bride or groom was, just an assumption that she would attend. Her mind began to spin with possibilities. "Well," she whispered, leaning against the kitchen counter, "either I'm about to witness the most important wedding in England that everyone forgot to tell me about, or someone has made a mistake of spectacular proportions." She tapped the invitation against the counter, watching the sunlight glint off the embossed lettering, which seemed almost too formal, too deliberate. The air in her cozy kitchen suddenly felt charged, as though the card itself carried a secret. Agatha's thoughts were a whirlpool of irritation and intrigue. On one hand, she was mildly annoyed to be dragged into someone else's event without explanation. On the other, there was an undeniable thrill, a mystery to unravel, a puzzle that beckoned like a fox in the hedgerows she often watched while tending her garden. Who would send such an invitation? And why? The questions piled upon each other, tugging at her natural curiosity and her sense of propriety, which, though formidable, often gave way when adventure, or a hint of scandal, was at stake. She placed the invitation carefully on the table, as though it were a fragile artifact, and sat back down with her coffee. The morning sounds of the garden returned, but they seemed different now, as though the birds themselves were whispering secrets. Agatha picked up her cup again, taking a slow, deliberate sip, and allowed herself a small, mischievous smile. Whatever this wedding was, she would find out. It might be tedious, it might be scandalous, but one thing was certain. It had arrived on her doorstep, and she could not ignore it. The sun climbed higher, illuminating her tidy cottage and casting gentle shadows across the room. Agatha felt a spark of anticipation coil within her, subtle yet insistent. She glanced once more at the invitation, the strange crest staring back at her as if daring her to uncover its secrets. A quiet morning it had been, until now. Agatha sat back in her chair, the mysterious invitation resting on the table like a miniature challenge. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the contacts until she found the familiar name of her old friend, Mrs. Bloxby. With a soft press of the call button, she held the phone to her ear, listening to the faint clicks of the line connecting. When the familiar, slightly brisk voice answered, Agatha felt a sense of comfort amid the swirl of questions that had taken over her morning. "Good morning, Bloxby," she began, trying to sound nonchalant despite the flutter of curiosity in her chest. "You won't believe what landed on my doorstep today." "Oh." Mrs. Bloxby's tone carried that mixture of amusement and suspicion Agatha had come to expect. "Do tell, Raisin. I trust it isn't another one of those ridiculous mail-order catalogs that promise more than they deliver." Agatha chuckled softly. "Worse, or perhaps better depending on your perspective. It's an invitation. To a wedding. Only here's the catch, I have no idea whose wedding it is." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The card is elegant, formal, with a crest I don't recognize, and a seal that looks as though it was stamped by royalty. And yet no explanation. No names. Just an assumption that I will attend." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Well," Mrs. Bloxby said finally, her voice low and knowing, "that sounds intriguing. You know what they say about invitations that arrive unannounced in Carsley. Rarely are they as innocent as they seem. Often there's a story behind them, a secret someone wants hidden, or a scandal that hasn't yet been whispered aloud." Agatha leaned forward, her interest piqued. "A scandal, you say?" she asked, a note of amusement threading through her voice. "Now you have my full attention." "Oh, Raisin," Mrs. Bloxby said, a soft chuckle accompanying her words, "if only you knew the things that have happened here in the village over the years. Weddings, engagements, family disputes, they never appear in the local papers, but you'd be amazed at what people try to keep quiet. Sometimes an invitation like yours is a mere smokescreen for something far more interesting." Agatha's mind raced. The idea of a smokescreen, of secrets tucked neatly behind polite wording and formal crests, thrilled her in a way few things could. She pictured herself navigating the ceremony, observing guests, listening to hushed exchanges, noting every subtle gesture or uneasy glance. Her lips curved into a small, mischievous smile. "So you're saying I shouldn't ignore it?" she asked, though she already knew her own answer. "Precisely," Mrs. Bloxby replied. "Attend, but keep your eyes and ears open. And Raisin, do be discreet. Some of these affairs are delicate, and a wrong word could send ripples through the village." Agatha's fingers drummed lightly against the phone. "Discreet, yes. But I do love a little adventure now and then. I think this might be one of those times." Mrs. Bloxby's chuckle was warm and conspiratorial. "Very well, Raisin. Then I expect a full report when you return. But mind you, some things are better seen than told." With a final exchange of pleasantries, Agatha hung up, her mind buzzing with anticipation. The morning sunlight felt sharper somehow, illuminating possibilities she could scarcely contain. She glanced at the invitation once more, turning it over in her hands. There was something tantalizing in the unknown, a lure she found impossible to resist. Decision made, she allowed herself a moment to savor the thrill. There was a wedding, a mystery, and perhaps a touch of scandal, all wrapped in polite cursive and a wax seal. Agatha Raisin, ever curious, would attend. Not out of obligation, certainly not, but out of a deep-seated need to uncover the truth, and to enjoy the adventure along the way. The invitation remained on the table, an elegant challenge waiting for her next move, while the garden outside basked in the gentle warmth of late morning sun. Agatha took a deliberate sip of coffee, her mind already plotting her approach. Something told her this would be no ordinary wedding. Chapter 2. Secrets in the Village. The village green was alive with the gentle hum of Carsley life, a tapestry of familiar faces and ordinary chatter that somehow carried a heightened sense of curiosity that morning. Agatha Raisin stepped carefully onto the cobblestones, adjusting the light scarf around her neck as she surveyed the scene. She had always loved this spot, the open expanse where the grass was kept trim, the benches polished to a soft gleam, and the old oak tree provided shade and a sense of permanence. Today, however, The usual calm was undercut by whispers and glances directed toward her, or so she fancied. "Did you hear about the wedding?" Mrs. Pritchard, the baker's wife, asked in a stage whisper to anyone within earshot. "I hear the bride might be someone from London. Can you imagine?" Agatha raised an eyebrow, noting the subtle excitement in the older woman's voice. She wandered closer, pretending to admire a flower bed while listening. "London, you say? How delightful," she murmured under her breath, a sly smile tugging at her lips. The village's love for speculation was a rich source of both amusement and information. Nearby, the postman shuffled nervously, clutching his mailbag as if it contained state secrets. He glanced repeatedly at the old fountain, where two elderly men were engaged in a lively debate. "It's absurd," one muttered, wagging a finger for emphasis. "I heard the groom has connections to some sort of, well, let's just say peculiar business. Not the sort of thing one should mix with a quiet village wedding." Agatha tilted her head, jotting mental notes. Peculiar business? That could mean anything, and yet, in Carsley, the smallest hint of scandal carried weight. She made a silent promise to remember that comment. Across the green, a cluster of women leaned conspiratorially over the railing outside the grocer's shop. "I'm telling you, the florist is furious," one hissed. "He was promised the entire arrangement, and now they've gone elsewhere. Such disrespect." The shopkeeper, a tall man with a permanent crease of worry etched across his forehead, peeked through the door, apparently trying to seem unaware of the gossip he clearly relished. Agatha made a mental note of his expression, filing it neatly alongside the snippets of conversation she was collecting. Everyone had a story, everyone had a role in the unfolding drama, if only they knew it. A small boy darted past, tripping over the edge of a cobblestone and tumbling into a pile of autumn leaves. He sprang up immediately, brushing himself off, and glanced around as though the fall had been part of some elaborate plan. Agatha couldn't help but smile. The village had its quirks, its small theatrics, and she adored them all, even as she mentally catalogued the details of today's unusual buzz. Settling onto a bench near the fountain, she allowed herself to observe more deliberately. There was a rhythm to the gossip, a mixture of exaggeration, speculation, and half-truths. It was in these layers that she found her entertainment, and her clues. Contradictions abounded. Some villagers insisted the bride was nervous and indecisive, while others claimed she was assertive and commanding. One elderly gentleman swore he had seen the groom's uncle lurking near the village hall at odd hours. Each tidbit seemed insignificant alone, yet together they formed a mosaic of possibilities, a puzzle she was eager to explore. Agatha's eyes followed a cat slinking along the garden wall, her thoughts weaving between the whispers she had overheard. She made careful mental notes of the nervous postman, the disgruntled shopkeeper, and the subtle tensions that seemed to ripple beneath the village's polite surface. Every interaction hinted at hidden rivalries or secrets that might intersect with the mysterious wedding. As she rose to leave the green, Agatha allowed herself a small, satisfied sigh. The village had spoken in whispers, gestures, and half-finished sentences. She now carried these hints with her, a tapestry of human behavior to be unraveled. The mystery was not yet clear, but the threads were there, waiting to be pulled. And Agatha Raisin, ever attentive, was ready to follow them wherever they might lead. Agatha strolled along the edge of the village green, her sharp eyes scanning the hedgerows and flower beds as if secrets might be hiding among the leaves. She had learned long ago that in a village like Carsley, the smallest details, an odd glance, a misplaced object, a whispered remark, could unravel a much larger story. As she paused to inspect a particularly dense hedge near the old stone wall, she noticed a figure crouched quietly, pruning a patch of roses with methodical precision. The man looked up briefly, his eyes meeting hers with a careful, measured glance before returning to his work. There was something about him, calm, observant, and seemingly aware of far more than he let on. Agatha straightened, offering a polite nod. "Good morning," she said, her curiosity edging into cautious friendliness. "Morning," he replied, his voice low but steady. There was a quiet confidence in it, a sense that he was used to noticing things others overlooked. "You're out early." The hedges seem to attract a lot of attention this morning, don't they? Agatha tilted her head, intrigued. You could say that. One might even find interesting things if one looks closely enough. She watched him carefully as he continued trimming, his hands deft and precise. Something told her this wasn't the sort of casual gardener who simply minded his own business. Indeed, he said, pausing to wipe his brow with a cloth. Sometimes the smallest clue is hidden where nobody thinks to look. He gave her a fleeting, enigmatic smile that suggested he knew more than he admitted. Agatha's interest sharpened immediately. Perhaps, she replied cautiously, though one must be careful. Curiosity can be complicated. He chuckled softly, a sound that was both restrained and amused. Complicated is a good word for it. But occasionally it can lead to understanding. He returned to the hedge and Agatha's gaze followed, noticing something white tucked between the branches. She stepped closer. "What's this?" she murmured, reaching for the small folded piece of paper wedged securely in the dense leaves. Thomas, for that was his name, glanced at her without interrupting his careful movements. Agatha unfolded the note. The handwriting was unfamiliar, precise and cryptic. "The answer lies where shadows gather, but only those who look will see it. Trust the quiet observer." Agatha raised an eyebrow, scanning the note twice. "Well, that's intriguing," she said. The corners of her mouth twitched in a mixture of amusement and delight. Shadows, quiet observers. It reads like the start of some elaborate riddle. Thomas straightened, finally giving her his full attention. "Sometimes riddles are more useful than direct information," he said, his tone calm but measured. "They guide the careful observer without alarming those who prefer ignorance." Agatha studied him closely. His reserved demeanor, combined with an obvious understanding of human behavior, suggested he could be invaluable in deciphering the village's subtle undercurrents. "You might be right," she admitted, a flicker of a smile crossing her face. "And I do rather enjoy a good puzzle." She paused, glancing at him with a spark of curiosity. "Would you help me figure this out?" Thomas gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a small acknowledgement that seemed both cautious and willing. It was the beginning of an alliance, delicate and promising. Together they examined the note and the surrounding area, noting every detail. A crushed leaf here, a faint footprint there, the subtle placement of objects that others might overlook. As they worked, there was a quiet rhythm to their interaction, a blend of gentle humor, observation and unspoken trust. Agatha found herself enjoying the subtle exchange, appreciating the balance of skepticism and insight that Thomas brought to the investigation. The village, once a familiar backdrop, now held new possibilities, hidden messages, and a web of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. By the time they stepped back from the hedge, Agatha felt a surge of anticipation. The cryptic note, Thomas's quiet competence, and the hint of secrets tucked within Carsley's ordinary charm had combined to create a sense of excitement. She knew the wedding, and whatever mysteries surrounded it, was far more complex than she had imagined. And for the first time that day she felt certain she would not face it alone. Chapter 3: Clues Behind Closed Doors. Agatha Raisin approached the village hall with a measured, deliberate air, balancing her curiosity with her habitual caution. She had volunteered, half-truthfully, to assist with wedding preparations, claiming that her keen eye for detail might be useful for arranging flowers and tables. In truth, her motive was far more investigative. Every ribbon, every floral arrangement, every subtle tilt of a napkin presented a clue she intended to examine. The hall itself was brightly lit, sunlight streaming through tall windows, casting long rectangular patterns on the polished wooden floor. Agatha's gaze swept over the decorations, her sharp eyes noting incongruities. The flowers were slightly too lavish for a village affair, the table linens pristine to the point of intimidation, and the seating arrangement displayed an odd hierarchy that suggested more than simple formality. There were hints of tension beneath the surface, a decorative garland slightly askew as if someone had been careless or perhaps hurried, a subtle clash of colors in the bouquets that seemed deliberate rather than accidental. She moved quietly among the bustling assistants and relatives, listening for snippets of conversation. A pair of women in matching aprons whispered urgently near the catering table. "She doesn't even want this, can you imagine?" one murmured. Agatha paused mid-step, pretending to adjust the table centerpiece. "But father insists it must happen today. No excuses." The words were fleeting, almost swallowed by the background hum of activity, yet enough to prick at Agatha's suspicions. Her mind began to piece together the contradictions. A bride who did not wish to marry? Lavish preparations imposed against her will? Something about the scene felt rehearsed, as though appearances were being meticulously maintained while hidden tensions simmered just beneath the surface. Agatha's curiosity sharpened. She had always enjoyed a puzzle, but this one carried the tantalizing aroma of potential deception. Moving closer to the side of the hall, she noticed a man adjusting a large floral display. He appeared ordinary enough, yet his anxious glances toward the entrance betrayed an unusual concern. Agatha noted the detail silently. Anxiety, after all, was a window into intention, a small tremor that revealed far more than words ever could. She continued to drift subtly through the room, mentally cataloging each observation. The bride's bouquet was arranged with a precision that suggested either obsession or instruction. The centerpieces were exquisite yet slightly mismatched, hinting at hurried replacements or secret rearrangements. Even the placement of chairs, angled ever so slightly toward a particular corner, seemed to suggest a conversation someone hoped would remain hidden. Then she overheard another fragment, this time between a quiet, elderly woman and a younger attendant. "He said she would agree eventually, but I don't believe it. There's resistance. Mark my words, something will happen before the vows." Agatha froze just long enough for the words to imprint themselves clearly in her mind, then moved on as if absorbed by a misplaced ribbon. The possibility of disruption, or even outright sabotage, set her heart beating a little faster. As she paused near the back of the hall, she allowed herself a wry smile. She had always enjoyed this delicate dance, observing, listening, and piecing together the story hidden beneath polite smiles and deliberate gestures. In Carsley, appearances were rarely as simple as they seemed. Every quiver of a hand, every stolen glance, every whispered word could contain the key to understanding motives and unraveling intentions. Agatha straightened, dusting an imaginary speck from her apron, and took one last careful survey of the room. The hall was immaculate, orderly, and yet charged with subtle tension, the contradictions of meticulous preparation clashing with hushed uncertainty. She felt the thrill of being a step ahead, of noticing what others overlooked. Something was decidedly off, she realized, a secret simmering just beneath the surface of this polished, ceremonial stage. And as she adjusted a slightly crooked chair, her mind quietly raced, cataloging the details, filing away every unusual gesture and hushed exchange. The wedding might appear ordinary, but Agatha Raisin knew better. In this room, behind closed doors, truths were hidden in plain sight, and she intended to uncover every one of them. Agatha was adjusting a place card near the front row when a sudden knock at the venue door made her jump. The hall, moments ago filled with soft activity and whispered instructions, fell briefly silent as a small courier, looking both apologetic and nervous, handed her a cream-colored envelope sealed with plain wax. No name was written on the outside, only her own, carefully penned in a neat, unfamiliar script. She held it for a moment, studying it. Her fingers tingled, not with excitement, but with the prickling sense of caution she had learned to trust. The hall seemed to shrink around her as she tore the envelope open, revealing a single sheet of heavy paper. The words inside were brief, formal, and yet carried an unmistakable weight. "Leave the preparations be. Curiosity can be dangerous, and those who pry risk consequences. Do not interfere." Agatha read it twice, letting the ominous tone settle. The handwriting was precise, almost clinical, each letter sharp and deliberate. There was no signature, no hint of who might have sent it, only a warning that suggested she had crossed some invisible line. For a heartbeat, she felt a flicker of unease, a shadow of fear that whispered she might be meddling where she ought not. But the sensation was fleeting. Curiosity always proved stronger than caution in her case. She folded the note carefully, placing it on the nearest table with deliberate care, and leaned back against a chair. Her mind raced with questions. Who would send such a letter and why? Was it a prank by an overzealous relative, or a genuine warning from someone intimately involved in the event? And most pressing of all, what secrets lay hidden behind the veil of polite ceremony and carefully arranged decorations? A small, wry smile curved her lips. "Well," she murmured under her breath, "someone clearly thinks I'm not clever enough to handle a little mystery. How quaint." She allowed herself a brief, amused laugh, aware that the sound carried slightly across the hall but drew no attention from the busy helpers around her. Agatha's thoughts shifted to the implications. A warning so vague could mean anything, or nothing at all, but it carried a subtle threat that made the air feel charged, alive with potential danger or scandal. She felt a thrill run through her, a mixture of delight and anticipation. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had always relished. A puzzle with invisible stakes, where observation, intuition, and courage could make all the difference. Ignoring the letter, she returned to her careful inspection of the venue, letting her eyes wander over the floral arrangements and meticulously aligned chairs once more. Every detail seemed imbued with purpose. Nothing in Carsley ever happened by accident. Her gaze lingered on the far corner of the hall where a small, curtained alcove suggested a space reserved for secrecy or preparation. The possibilities tugged at her mind, teasing her with whispers of hidden intentions and clandestine conversations. She straightened, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve, and felt a surge of determination. No anonymous warning would sway her from uncovering the truth. If someone was trying to intimidate her, or perhaps protect a secret, they had underestimated her resolve. She would observe, question, and deduce every subtle clue, following threads wherever they led. Agatha's attention returned briefly to the letter, a tangible reminder that not everything in the hall was as it seemed. The shadow of threat lingered, adding a fresh layer of suspense to an already curious scene. And yet, beneath the tension, there was exhilaration, the promise of discovery, the delicate dance of observation and deduction, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had been given a challenge worthy of her skills. With a final glance around the venue, she pocketed the note, ensuring it would remain safe for future consideration. The wedding preparations continued around her, oblivious to the small drama that had just unfolded. Agatha Raisin, undeterred, moved back into the midst of the bustling activity, every sense alert, every mind synapse tingling with the anticipation of uncovering the secrets hidden behind the polished decorations, hushed whispers, and now the cryptic warning. The morning sunlight slanted through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air, while Agatha, determined and quietly amused, prepared herself for the mysteries yet to reveal themselves. Chapter 4: Unexpected Guests. The village hall hummed with quiet excitement as guests began to arrive, their polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor and murmurs drifting through the air like threads of anticipation. Agatha Raisin moved among the tables and flower arrangements with practiced ease, her eyes scanning every face, every gesture, every detail. Today more than ever, her attention was sharpened. The cryptic note, the hushed conversations, and the peculiar decorations had primed her instincts for anything unusual. It was then she noticed him, a stranger, tall and angular, entering quietly through the side door. He did not carry himself with the casual ease of someone familiar with the village. Instead, his movements were precise, almost deliberate, and his eyes flicked from guest to guest with a subtle calculation that set him apart. Agatha's gaze narrowed. Something about his presence, so understated yet oddly meticulous, drew immediate suspicion. The villagers noticed him as well, though none approached directly. Whispers began to ripple through the hall. "Who is that?" Mrs. Pritchard whispered to the baker, her voice tinged with unease. "I've never seen him before." "He's certainly not from around here," the baker replied quietly, craning his neck to get a better view. "And look at the way he scans the room, almost like he's measuring everyone." Agatha smiled faintly to herself, keeping a polite distance while observing the stranger. He moved toward one of the back pews, his posture stiff yet controlled, and settled into a seat with minimal disturbance. His hands rested lightly on his knees, fingers tapping ever so slightly, a subtle rhythm that hinted at impatience or perhaps careful calculation. She took mental notes of his attire, tailored but muted, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air around him, gloves neatly folded in his lap. He seemed almost too careful, too deliberate for someone simply attending a wedding. His eyes, dark and attentive, followed each movement in the hall, but he avoided engaging with anyone directly. There was a careful tension in his shoulders, a readiness to act if circumstances required. Agatha's curiosity deepened. She leaned slightly toward a nearby flower arrangement, pretending to adjust it, while listening to the murmurs of the villagers. "I don't like the look of him," muttered a middle-aged woman to her friend. "He's too smooth, too controlled. Something isn't right." The stranger's attention flickered briefly toward the door as a sudden draft passed through the hall. A slight crease appeared between his brows, subtle but telling. Agatha noted the reaction meticulously. Villagers often missed these minor, unconscious signals, but to her trained eye, they were golden clues. He was watching, assessing, calculating, and perhaps guarding some secret that intersected with the wedding's purpose. She continued to observe discreetly, noting how the stranger adjusted his posture whenever a group of villagers drew near, yet never fully relaxed. Each glance, each micro-expression, added to a growing impression of someone not merely attending but invested in the unfolding event. Whether as observer or instigator, she could not yet tell, but she knew instinctively that he was connected to the wedding in a way that would soon become significant. As the murmur of voices rose, punctuated by the occasional laughter or shuffle of feet, Agatha felt a subtle thrill. The wedding was meant to be a picturesque celebration, yet here, in the midst of roses, ribbons, and polite chatter, a tension simmered just below the surface. The stranger in the pew was a mystery wrapped in calm, and Agatha Raisin, ever watchful, intended to unravel it. She adjusted a napkin, casting one last covert glance in his direction, and allowed herself a small, private smile. The day had begun with ordinary anticipation, but with this enigmatic presence now among the guests, she knew the ordinary would quickly give way to intrigue. The morning's gentle hum of preparation erupted into chaos when a shriek echoed through the village hall. Agatha, arranging a last cluster of flowers, spun around to see the bridesmaid, face pale and hands trembling, clutching an empty hanger. "It's gone," she cried. "The dress, it's missing." Instantly, the hall became a flurry of activity. Guests whispered in shocked tones, chairs scraped across the polished floor, and the florist's assistant muttered nervously about misplaced ribbons and disturbed arrangements. Agatha felt a familiar spark of curiosity ignite. The scene was absurdly dramatic, yet beneath the panic lay a thread of intrigue begging to be unraveled. She approached the flustered maid, speaking in a calm voice that cut through the noise. "Tell me exactly what happened. Where was it last?" The maid gestured vaguely toward a changing area curtained off at the far end of the hall. "I left it there just for a moment to fetch the veil. When I returned it was gone." Her voice wavered with a mixture of disbelief and fear. Agatha nodded, her mind already racing. A missing dress could be a simple accident, yet something about the timing, the moments before the ceremony when nerves and stakes were highest, suggested intentional interference. She moved swiftly toward the curtained area, scanning the floor for anything out of place. Near the edge of the carpet, partially hidden beneath a decorative runner, she spotted a small scrap of fabric. It wasn't the dress itself, but a tear from it, a tiny fragment that seemed to have been left deliberately, or carelessly, behind. Agatha crouched, lifting it carefully. The fabric was smooth and expensive, unmistakably matching the bride's gown. A clue, however slight, was enough to indicate sabotage rather than misplacement. Her mind ticked through possibilities. Who might benefit from this disruption? The nervous glances of the bridesmaids, the anxious whispering among the family, the stranger she had noticed earlier, all potential suspects. Agatha's sharp eyes caught details others overlooked. A scuff mark near the doorway, a faint trace of soil on the polished floor, the way the curtains hung slightly askew, as if someone had passed through in a hurry. Suppressing a sigh, she straightened. There was no time for panic. The bride's composure, and the ceremony itself, depended on swift action. Yet even as she assisted with the frantic search, Agatha couldn't resist a small, private thrill. This was exactly the sort of subtle intrigue she lived for. A minor scandal with hints of intent, leaving a trail only the observant could follow. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the hall tightened, a mix of humor and tension curling together. Agatha moved among the flustered participants, offering gentle suggestions while her mind catalogued every irregularity. The scrap of fabric remained tucked in her hand, a tangible thread leading toward answers yet to be discovered. By the time the florist returned with a hastily assembled temporary gown, Agatha allowed herself a discreet smirk. The wedding would continue, yes, but someone had made a deliberate attempt to disrupt it. And she, Agatha Raisin, intended to discover exactly who and why. The game, she realized with satisfaction, was just beginning. Chapter 5. Secrets Unravel. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the village garden, illuminating beds of roses and lavender in a gentle, warm light. Agatha Raisin strolled along the winding gravel path, keeping a casual air while her sharp eyes sought out details. The air was filled with the faint scent of freshly cut grass and the subtle hum of village life, yet beneath the surface tension lingered like an unspoken secret. She noticed a bridesmaid standing near the stone fountain, nervously twisting the hem of her dress and casting furtive glances over her shoulder. Agatha approached with practiced ease, maintaining a polite distance while letting her presence be known. "Lovely afternoon, isn't it?" she began lightly, though her tone carried an undercurrent of curiosity. The young woman startled slightly, her cheeks flushing. "Yes, very pleasant," she stammered, adjusting her posture as if to hide her unease. Agatha tilted her head, observing every micro-expression, the slight tremor in the bridesmaid's hands, the way her eyes darted toward the tall hedges, as though she feared someone might be eavesdropping. "You seem troubled," Agatha said casually, as if noting the weather. "Is there something on your mind?" The bridesmaid hesitated, her gaze dropping to the cobblestones. Then, with a barely audible sigh, she spoke. "It's complicated. There are things happening behind the scenes, things people would rather keep secret." Her voice was low, tinged with anxiety. Agatha leaned slightly forward, her interest piqued. "Secrets often have a way of slipping out," she murmured. "Especially in a village like ours." The young woman nodded quickly. "It's not just nerves or last-minute jitters. Someone is pressuring her, our bride. I don't know all the details, but there are letters, threats, hints of blackmail." She shivered, glancing around as if the very walls had ears. "I didn't want to say anything inside. People are watching." Agatha's mind raced, cataloging every detail. Letters, threats, blackmail. It fit perfectly with the subtle tension she had sensed among the wedding party, the mismatched decorations, the missing dress, and now the anxious expressions of those closest to the bride. A complex web of motives and rivalries was unfolding before her eyes. Who would do such a thing?" the bridesmaid asked, voice trembling. "And why?" "That," Agatha said, her tone measured yet firm, "is the question, isn't it? Sometimes it's not about who would do it, but who benefits from it." She allowed herself a small, knowing smile. And in a village full of personalities, there's always someone who sees an advantage. The bridesmaid bit her lip, her nerves clearly still frayed, yet she seemed to relax slightly under Agatha's calm, observant presence. "I think there are rivalries, personal grudges, arguments that have festered for years. Complicated. And I'm afraid of what might happen if the truth comes out." Agatha nodded, filing the information carefully in her mind. The garden, with its serenity and sunlit paths, now felt charged with quiet revelations. Every whispered confession, every nervous glance added a new layer to the mystery she was untangling. "Thank you for trusting me with this," Agatha said gently, though a sparkle of amusement danced in her eyes. Sometimes sharing a secret is the first step to solving it. As the bridesmaid scurried off, relief and apprehension mixing in her hurried steps, Agatha remained for a moment longer, surveying the garden. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, yet beneath their beauty, undercurrents of tension and hidden motives pulsed quietly. Villagers, alliances, grudges, all pieces of a puzzle that only careful observation could assemble. Agatha Raisin allowed herself a small, satisfied sigh. One more thread of the wedding's tangled web had been revealed, and she was closer than ever to understanding the full story. But the secrets were many, the motives layered, and the day's intrigue far from over. Agatha Raisin had just returned from the garden, her mind buzzing with the bridesmaids' revelations, when a sudden stir near the entrance caught her attention. Guests murmured in alarm, their voices a mixture of worry and confusion. The groom, a tall, impeccably dressed man, was nowhere to be found. "Have you seen him?" one of the ushers asked frantically, scanning the crowd. "He was right here, just a moment ago." Agatha's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary disappearance. Something had drawn him away deliberately, or he had chosen to vanish. She exchanged a quick glance with Thomas, who had been quietly observing from a corner. His calm expression belied the urgency of the situation, and Agatha knew instantly that he would be invaluable in tracking subtle clues. "Let's see where he went," she murmured, moving toward the side corridor that led to the smaller rooms and storage areas of the hall. Thomas followed silently, his presence reassuring, eyes flicking to every shadow and corner. They followed a series of faint signs: a scuffed floorboard here, a slight draft from an open window there, and a partially closed door that had been overlooked in the morning bustle. Agatha crouched to inspect the floor, noting a small footprint that had been partially erased by the cleaning crew but was still discernible to her trained eye. "He went this way," she said softly, pointing toward a narrow passage behind the hall. Thomas nodded and followed, careful not to disturb the fragile trail. The corridor was dimly lit, lined with old wooden beams, and carried the faint smell of dust and aged paper. Every step seemed to heighten the suspense, the quiet creaking of floorboards echoing like whispers of a secret being uncovered. At the end of the passage they discovered a door slightly ajar. Pushing it gently, Agatha found a small hidden room. The groom's coat had been hastily folded on a chair, and a note lay on the table written in precise, unfamiliar handwriting. She picked it up carefully, reading aloud. "Meet me where the shadows gather. Time is short. Trust only those who watch quietly." Her pulse quickened. The message was cryptic, hinting at secrecy and urgency. Someone had orchestrated this disappearance, and the groom had either complied willingly or been coerced. Agatha's mind raced with possibilities: rivalries, blackmail, or perhaps a hidden family feud linked to the wedding's mysteries. Thomas leaned against the doorway, scanning the hall from the narrow window that overlooked the grounds. "He's being led somewhere," he said quietly. "But whoever is guiding him wants to remain unseen. Watch for patterns, not people." Agatha nodded, absorbing the advice. She felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with a touch of amusement. The day, meant to be filled with celebration, had become a puzzle demanding careful deduction. Every overlooked detail, an open window, a footprint, a cryptic note, was a piece of the story, a thread leading toward answers hidden in plain sight. As they stepped back into the passage, Agatha allowed herself a private smile. The wedding had taken an unexpected turn, and the stakes were higher than ever. Yet she was ready. With Thomas at her side and her mind alert to every subtle clue, Agatha Raisin intended to follow the trail wherever it led, uncovering the truth behind the groom's mysterious disappearance. Chapter 6. The Truth Emerges. The village hall felt unusually still, as if the commotion of the morning had been swallowed by anticipation. Agatha Raisin moved quietly among the remaining guests, her sharp eyes scanning for the stranger she had observed days before. The tall, angular man had been a source of subtle unease, his measured movements and calculating glances hinting at a motive just beneath the surface. Today she intended to uncover it. She spotted him near the edge of the hall, speaking softly with a woman who appeared hesitant and nervous. Agatha's curiosity sharpened. She observed the way he leaned slightly forward, gestures restrained yet purposeful, suggesting a conversation of importance and secrecy. Carefully she edged closer, pretending to adjust a floral display while listening in. The stranger's words were clipped and deliberate. "It's crucial that no one interferes. The family feud must remain hidden, or it will unravel everything." Agatha's eyebrows rose. Family feud? That explained the tension she had sensed among villagers and the cryptic warnings she had received. Thomas, who had been shadowing her movements silently, whispered, "That's our clue. Old village rivalry. It links to the wedding somehow." Agatha nodded subtly, her mind already piecing together the fragments. As she listened, she recognized the stranger's voice from earlier, calm, composed, yet carrying an unmistakable weight. The truth began to crystallize. He was not merely a guest or observer. He was a mediator, or perhaps a guardian, sent to oversee the delicate balance between feuding families. His meticulous attention and subtle influence over the proceedings suddenly made sense. With careful timing, Agatha approached, her presence casual but her gaze steady. "Good afternoon," she said, voice light yet confident. "It seems you've been busy ensuring the day goes smoothly." The stranger looked up, momentarily startled, then composed himself. "Indeed," he replied, a faint edge of surprise in his tone. "One must be vigilant when old grievances linger." Agatha allowed a small, knowing smile. "Old grievances can create the most interesting complications," she said. "I imagine some families are more passionate than others about weddings." He studied her for a moment, then inclined his head slightly. "You are perceptive. It is rare to see someone notice without causing alarm." His words, though cautious, carried a faint respect. Agatha felt a subtle sense of satisfaction. She had observed, deduced, and now understood the stranger's true purpose. Yet even as clarity settled, questions lingered. Why had he not revealed himself sooner? What had prompted the cryptic note and the careful guidance of the groom? The layers of secrecy were intricate, interwoven with pride, rivalry, and long-held grudges that only a few knew existed. Agatha's gaze swept over the hall, noting familiar faces, the nervous bridesmaids, anxious relatives, and unsuspecting villagers, each part of a larger tapestry she was slowly unraveling. The stranger, once a source of subtle threat, now appeared as a key piece of the puzzle, connecting past tensions with present mysteries. She allowed herself a quiet sigh of satisfaction. One of the wedding's most perplexing questions had been answered, yet the day's intrigue was far from over. With the stranger's hidden agenda revealed, the path forward was clearer, and Agatha Raisin felt a renewed sense of purpose. The truth was emerging, but more surprises awaited, just beneath the surface of Carsley's seemingly tranquil celebrations. Agatha Raisin lingered near the back of the hall, her eyes sweeping across the assembled guests with a blend of amusement and quiet satisfaction. The day's earlier tension had settled into an expectant hush, yet a thread of curiosity remained, one that promised revelation. She had already unraveled the stranger's purpose, but the deeper question lingered. What was the true reason behind this elaborate, peculiar wedding? Her sharp eyes caught the bride, standing at the front with an almost imperceptible glint of mischief in her expression. Agatha approached quietly, careful not to draw attention, and noticed subtle cues in the woman's demeanor, relaxed posture, a calm smile, and a confidence that suggested a plan unfolding exactly as intended. It was then that a small group of family members huddled near a side table, exchanging furtive glances. Agatha's gaze shifted between them and the bride, and suddenly the pieces fell into place. The wedding itself was a decoy, a staged performance designed to conceal the real drama, a dispute over inheritance that had long simmered beneath the village's polite exterior. The bride had orchestrated the day to appear conventional, to draw eyes and gossip, while cleverly maneuvering the outcome of a private family matter. A soft chuckle escaped Agatha as she pieced together the ingenuity. No missing dresses, no frantic disappearances. These had all been carefully plotted diversions, drawing attention away from the true objective. Even the cryptic note sent to her was part of the ruse, designed to keep her alert but misdirected, ensuring that her observations would remain entertaining rather than obstructive. Agatha moved closer, catching a snippet of conversation between the bride and a loyal family confidant. "The inheritance papers are secured. Everyone else believes the wedding is the priority. Perfect timing." The cleverness of it all, the audacity, elicited a quiet, appreciative laugh from Agatha. She had seen many schemes, but rarely one executed with such finesse and subtle humor. The villagers, still slightly bewildered, gradually began to notice the calm resolution. The stranger in the pew now appeared relaxed, almost satisfied, and even the previously anxious bridesmaids were beginning to exchange amused smiles. Agatha, ever perceptive, noted the way the village had been gently guided through the drama, each person contributing unwittingly to the bride's carefully laid plan. "Clever girl," Agatha murmured under her breath, a grin tugging at the corners of her lips. "And to think all this fuss for something entirely hidden." She glanced around at the hall's polished surfaces, the arranged flowers, and the softly murmuring guests, appreciating the cozy human-scale nature of the deception. No harm had been done, just a quiet lesson in observation, patience, and the occasional delight of being outwitted. The bride caught Agatha's eye and gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement, a private acknowledgement of shared understanding. Agatha's mind, always alert to nuance, catalogued the final threads of intrigue. The wedding that had never truly existed had provided entertainment, suspense, and the thrill of unraveling a mystery without leaving anyone worse for wear. As the afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, Agatha allowed herself a deep, contented sigh. The hall was alive with gentle chatter, laughter, and the soft rustle of dresses. Carsley's quaint village life had resumed its charming rhythm, and Agatha, notebook full of observations and a mind buzzing with satisfaction, felt that once again she had been part of something delightfully unusual, quietly clever, and thoroughly entertaining. Chapter 7. Aftermath and Revelations. The village green, usually a place of tranquil conversation and leisurely strolls, had become the center of quiet speculation. News of the wedding's true purpose, an elaborate decoy to resolve an inheritance dispute, had spread like a polite ripple across Carsley, leaving villagers in various states of amusement, relief, and mild exasperation. Agatha Raisin observed it all from the edge of a flower bed, notebook in hand, her eyes flicking from one face to another with the practiced discernment of someone accustomed to reading human nature. Mrs. Pritchard, who prided herself on knowing everything before anyone else, was shaking her head in mild disbelief, muttering under her breath about the audacity of the bride and the foolhardiness of the family. Nearby, Mr. Jenkins, the baker, exchanged sheepish smiles with the butcher, as if silently acknowledging that they had all contributed unwittingly to the spectacle. Agatha suppressed a small chuckle, appreciating the gentle irony. Even in a village where appearances mattered, people rarely noticed how easily they could be guided. Children ran past with sticky hands and mismatched ribbons, blissfully unaware of the adult intricacies unfolding around them. Agatha's gaze softened as she watched them, a reminder that life, despite its quirks and complications, continued with quiet persistence. Yet, amid the laughter and chatter, subtle tensions lingered. A few family members avoided direct eye contact, their pride slightly bruised, while others quietly plotted reconciliation or subtle revenge, each interaction a tiny drama playing out against the sunlit backdrop. Agatha noted the subtle alliances forming as well. The bridesmaids, now relaxed and chatting freely, shared whispered jokes about the day's chaos, their earlier anxiety melting into camaraderie. Thomas, standing slightly apart but attentive, exchanged a nod with her, signaling the quiet satisfaction of a shared investigation successfully navigated. There was a rhythm to these interactions, a pattern of human behavior that Agatha found endlessly fascinating. As she wandered through the green, she overheard snippets of conversation. "Well, I never imagined she'd pull something like this," said one villager, shaking her head with bemusement. "Quite clever, really?" Another responded with a laugh. "And to think we were all fussing over decorations and seating arrangements while the real plan was happening behind the scenes." Agatha made a discreet note, enjoying the gentle irony and the layers of misunderstanding that had contributed to the day's charm. Even the stranger, now revealed to be a mediator in the old feud, walked calmly among the villagers, his stern exterior softened by the relief of a plan executed without incident. Agatha observed him with quiet amusement, noting how the threads of secrecy and tension had been carefully orchestrated and ultimately resolved. She reflected on the delicate balance of intentions and actions, of observation and intervention, that had carried the day to its peaceful conclusion. Pausing near a bench shaded by an ancient oak, Agatha allowed herself a private smile. There had been suspense, intrigue, and more than a few humorous misunderstandings, yet the village remained intact, its charm preserved. The human foibles she had witnessed, the anxieties, the jealousies, the small triumphs, were all part of what made Carsley such a captivating place to observe. Even as the afternoon waned and the villagers began to disperse, a faint sense of lingering mystery remained. Agatha, notebook safely tucked under her arm, mused quietly to herself about the secrets still hidden in quiet corners, the whispers of untold stories waiting for the right observer. She had witnessed resolution and revelation, yet the village always held room for more curiosity, more intrigue, and always more charm. Agatha Raisin stepped lightly across the green, her mind alive with reflection and gentle amusement, satisfied that once again she had seen human nature at its most intricate and endearing, and that the village of Carsley, in all its cozy, unpredictable glory, would continue to provide both mystery and delight for those willing to look closely. Agatha Raisin was adjusting a row of freshly polished chairs near the village hall's entrance when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Mrs. Blocksby smiling warmly, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of amusement and gratitude. "Agatha, I must say," Mrs. Blocksby began, her voice lowering conspiratorially, "you've been quite remarkable. Your little interventions may have saved us from a great deal of confusion today." Agatha arched an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Interventions, you say?" "I simply observed. Very carefully." Her tone was light, but there was pride in her voice. Subtlety was often the key to influencing events without anyone realizing it. Mrs. Blocksby chuckled, shaking her head. "Observed indeed. You noticed things others missed entirely, small details, gestures, expressions, all of it mattered. You've earned your place as Carsley's most discreet and effective detective." Before Agatha could respond, another voice joined in. It was the florist, a young woman who had been fretting over misplaced ribbons all morning. "And those scraps of fabric," she said, pointing dramatically toward the corner where Agatha had tucked the evidence. "Without your noticing them, we might never have known how cleverly the bride orchestrated everything. Truly extraordinary." Agatha allowed herself a private chuckle, imagining how the villagers would retell the story later. The observant, sometimes exasperating neighbor who always seemed to know more than she should. Her eyes scanned the hall, catching small nods of acknowledgement from the remaining guests, each silently offering thanks in their own understated ways. Thomas appeared at her side, leaning casually against the doorway with a faint grin. "Seems your reputation precedes you," he remarked quietly. "Even without you saying a word, people know who's been quietly steering the day." Agatha glanced at him, eyes sparkling with amusement. "I suppose one can only pretend to be unnoticed for so long." There was warmth in the interaction, the satisfaction of shared understanding, and the quiet pleasure of having worked alongside someone equally astute. As the crowd began to disperse, Mrs. Blocksby gave her one final nod. "Do remember," she said softly, "the village owes you a debt of gratitude. You've made sure that Carsley's peculiar charm remains intact, and for that we are all thankful." Agatha smiled, feeling a gentle glow of satisfaction. The recognition, small and understated, carried weight precisely because it was sincere. This was not about accolades or pride, but about the subtle knowledge that her efforts had brought clarity, calm, and a touch of order to a day brimming with eccentricity and intrigue. As she stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight, the scent of fresh blossoms drifting in from the green, Agatha allowed herself a moment of reflection. The villagers' gratitude was as warming as the sun on her face, and she relished the gentle humor of having influenced events without anyone truly realizing how. With a satisfied sigh and a private smirk, Agatha Raisin walked along the village path, notebook in hand, her mind alive with quiet amusement and the comfortable certainty that Carsley would continue to offer both mystery and charm, and that she would be ready as always to notice, observe, and unravel whatever came next. Chapter 8. Reflections and New Beginnings. The evening settled over Carsley like a gentle, familiar blanket, softening the edges of rooftops and trees with the muted glow of twilight. Inside her cozy cottage, Agatha Raisin poured herself a steaming cup of tea, the delicate aroma of bergamot mingling with the faint scent of lavender from the small bouquet on the windowsill. The kettle's soft whistle had long since subsided, leaving only the quiet hum of her little home and the occasional chirp of birds settling in for the night. Agatha sank into her favorite armchair, the cushions worn just enough to cradle her comfortably, and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The past week had been a whirlwind of mystery, intrigue, and subtle chaos, all neatly wrapped up with the village's usual blend of charm and eccentricity. She sipped her tea, letting the warmth seep through her, and considered the events in a calm, measured way. The wedding that never was had provided more than a few surprises. The bride's cleverness, the groom's brief disappearance, the stranger with a hidden agenda, it all painted a picture of Carsley that was both familiar and endlessly fascinating. Agatha smiled to herself, thinking of the villagers' expressions throughout the day: astonishment, amusement, anxiety, and finally relief. It was this human tapestry that made every case feel alive, every mystery a delight to unravel. Her gaze drifted to the small notebook on the side table, filled with observations, sketches of subtle clues, and notes that only she could fully interpret. Even now, the pages seemed to hum with the echoes of whispered conversations, fleeting glances, and tiny moments of human vulnerability that she had captured with careful attention. Agatha allowed herself a quiet chuckle. Some might find obsession in her meticulous note-taking, but she saw it as a form of art, a way of honoring the stories that unfolded around her. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. It was Thomas, holding a small plate of scones, the corners of his mouth lifting in a faint smile. "I thought you might like a treat," he said. "Even detectives need a little comfort after a long day." Agatha waved him in, accepting the plate with a grateful nod. "Comfort and clues both make life more interesting," she remarked, setting her cup down and reaching for a scone. Thomas chuckled, and for a moment, the weight of the mystery seemed to settle into something pleasantly ordinary, a shared joke, a small domestic rhythm amidst the larger world of intrigue. They sat together in companionable silence, nibbling at pastries and watching the last light of day fade beyond the curtains. Agatha's mind, ever alert, still toyed with possibilities. The village, though peaceful now, always had its secrets. She could sense subtle hints of stories that had yet to reveal themselves, letters tucked away, glances exchanged, mysteries waiting in quiet corners. The thought was thrilling rather than daunting, a reminder that her curiosity and keen eye would always have new terrain to explore. As the room darkened and the first stars appeared in the sky, Agatha allowed herself a deep, contented sigh. The week had been unusual, chaotic even, but it had ended in warmth, laughter, and the satisfaction of a mystery well unraveled. She leaned back in her chair, the tea cooling in her hands, and smiled at the comforting familiarity of her life in Carsley, its charm, its eccentricities, and its endless, subtle intrigue. With a final sip, she whispered to herself, "Rest for now, Agatha. Tomorrow who knows what secrets await." And in that quiet, contemplative moment, the promise of new mysteries lingered like the soft glow of the evening sun, gently illuminating the path ahead. As the last stars twinkled faintly outside her window, Agatha Raisin was tidying her small study, stacking her notebook and loose papers with careful precision. The calm of the evening settled around her like a familiar cloak, her cottage quiet except for the occasional crackle from the fireplace. She had just set down her teacup when a soft thud at the door caught her attention. Agatha rose, curious. On the welcome mat lay a neatly folded envelope, cream-colored and heavier than ordinary correspondence. There was no return address, only her name elegantly inscribed in dark ink, the script precise and slightly ornate. She picked it up, noting the faint scent of lavender mixed with paper, and felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. Settling back into her armchair, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The words inside were brief, measured, and deliberately tantalizing. "The past is only the beginning. When the fog lifts at Willow Creek, watch for the shadows that move where they should not. Your curiosity will be rewarded." Agatha's eyes widened slightly, a spark of excitement igniting. Willow Creek. Shadows moving where they should not. The phrasing was both poetic and mysterious, hinting at something just out of reach, waiting for someone perceptive enough to notice. She felt the familiar tingle of intrigue that always accompanied the first hint of a new puzzle. Thomas appeared at the doorframe, having lingered nearby after their earlier tea. He noticed the letter in Agatha's hands and tilted his head. "Another adventure?" he asked lightly, a faint grin tugging at his lips. Agatha smiled, folding the letter carefully and placing it atop her notebook. "It appears so," she replied, her voice calm but tinged with delight. "And it seems that even in the quiet of a resolved case, the village, or perhaps beyond, never fails to leave breadcrumbs for the observant." She leaned back, letting her mind wander through possibilities. The tone of the letter suggested subtle danger, clever deception, and hidden motives, yet it carried no immediate threat. Instead, it teased curiosity, promising the excitement of discovery rather than the strain of peril. Agatha appreciated the artistry. Whoever had sent it understood the balance of suspense and reassurance, a hallmark of the mysteries she cherished most. The cottage felt particularly cozy that night, the shadows flickering softly across the walls, the scent of lavender and tea lingering in the air. Agatha made a mental note to prepare carefully. New questions would require careful observation, patience, and perhaps a touch of daring. She allowed herself a private smile, imagining the gentle chaos and satisfaction that always accompanied the unraveling of secrets. As she set the letter aside, Agatha Raisin glanced out the window at the quiet village below. Carsley slept peacefully, its cottages glowing faintly in the night, unaware of the subtle hints of intrigue already arriving at her doorstep. She sipped the last of her tea and whispered to herself with quiet amusement, "Well, tomorrow promises a new mystery. And I shall be ready." The warmth of the cottage, the comfort of routine, and the promise of unseen secrets combined to create a perfect, cozy ending. Outside, the night remained calm, yet within Agatha's keen mind the adventure had already begun.